People said blood made a claim the way winter made a claim, quietly at first, then all at once, until every path belonged to it. Guinevere had spent 23 years believing she had no blood worth naming, only debt inked beside her mother's bones and a collarless life of service inside Dark Hollow Stone. That lie had kept the estate stable, the nobles polite, the household cruel in a practiced, orderly way. The truth was a sharper thing. The truth did not ask whether a girl was tired or frightened, or still bleeding from work-raw hands. The truth arrived like a blade slid between ribs and left there, warm. She was on her knees in the West Archive when she heard her own death scheduled between wine and weather. The archive door had not latched fully. Through the narrow split she saw Lady Celeste Darkhollow at the long cedar table, moonlight frosting the silver in her hair and the rings on her fingers. Two council elders sat opposite her, robes heavy with temple braid. A wax tablet lay open. Guinevere recognized the old crest stamped into one corner. The moon-crowned wolf circled by ash leaves, outlawed since the purge. Celeste tapped the tablet once. The girl is not a servant's get. She is Thornwood issue, concealed at birth. Confirmed by midwife testimony and blood ledger. Elder Marrow's mouth tightened. Then she is succession tinder. Then she is winter ash, Celeste corrected. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Before court convenes. Guinevere's hands stopped moving over the crate she had been tasked to inventory. Dust motes hung in the slit of light. Somewhere in the corridor, a clock chimed the quarter hour with soft, polite notes, as if the house itself approved. The second elder leaned forward. Public trial? No. Celeste folded her gloved hands. A temple writ declaring blight, then disposal outside formal jurisdiction. Quietly done, cleanly told. We will announce fever. The estate already buries its servants without spectacle. Servants. The word struck harder than disposal. Guinevere shifted, a board creaked, and three heads turned toward the door in the same instant. Celeste moved first. She crossed the room with measured speed, yanked the door inward, and found Guinevere crouched by crates with ink smudged on her wrists and fear turning her limbs to stone. For one suspended heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Celeste's hand caught her jaw, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. How much did you hear? Guinevere tasted metal where she had bitten her tongue. Enough. Enough to die for, then. Celeste released her with a shove that sent her shoulder into the wall. Take her below. The elders stood but did not interfere. They watched as two guards entered, faces blank, and hauled her up by both arms. She did not scream. The house taught obedience early and pain even earlier. As they dragged her down the servant's stair, she stared at the worn center of each step and felt her mind split along old seams. One part still counted chores, still calculated which kitchens had not been banked, still feared being late with hot water to the east wing. Another part, newly awake and furious, cataloged every word in the archive and refused to let it blur. I am not debt. I am not inventory. I am not something they can list, seal, and burn. The thought came in present tense, sharp and disorienting. I am moving. I am breathing. I am not gone yet. If I bow now, they will call it mercy when they erase me. If I beg, they will call it gratitude. If I disappear, no one has to choose, and that is what they have always wanted. A quiet girl. A useful girl. A girl who learns to fold herself smaller than her own shadow. But there is a mark on that tablet, and it is mine by blood even if I never touched it. I do not know how to be royal. I barely know how to be safe. Still, my name is not theirs to unmake. They threw her into the old root cellar beneath the northern kitchens, where damp climbed the walls and the only light came through a vent of rusted iron. Her left ankle had twisted on the last stair. Swelling already thickened around the bone. She sat against stone, breath shallow, and listened to muffled footsteps pass overhead. Near midnight, the hatch opened. Celeste stood above her with a lantern, "Stand," Celeste said. Guinevere stayed where she was. "You murdered them, did you not?" The Mooncrown line. Celeste descended 3 steps, expression almost pitying. "You think blood makes you precious. It makes you hazardous." She crouched so their faces were level. "Your mother should have remained grateful for kitchen shelter. Instead, she kept a dead dynasty alive in her womb. Sentiment is expensive, girl. I have paid for this realm with harder coin." "You mean fear. I mean order." Celeste rose. "At dawn you will sign a confession of scent corruption and self-banishing. Then you will be escorted past the ash boundary and not return." "And if I refuse?" Celeste's smile came back, thin as wire. "Then I submit your body as evidence of blight. Either way, by noon you are no longer my problem." She turned to leave, then paused on the stair. "Do not mistake this for cruelty. Cruelty is making a court choose between war and one nameless servant." The hatch slammed. Guinevere pressed her forehead to her knees and shook without sound. For years she had survived by lowering her gaze and finishing the task in front of her. Scrub the hall, mend the cuffs, keep breathing. That strategy had carried her through hunger, winter fever, and the casual humiliation that passed for discipline in noble houses. It could not carry her through a signed confession and a ditch outside the boundary stones. By the hour before dawn, she had made her choice. The vent above the wine rack had rusted clean through at one corner. She climbed stacked casks despite her ankle, skinning both palms. On the 3rd attempt, she forced her shoulder against the grate until one bolt snapped loose with a shriek of metal. She froze, listening. No alarm. Only wind. She wriggled through, tore her sleeve and the side of her hand on jagged iron, dropped 8 feet into the herb yard, and bit back a cry when her bad ankle folded. The cold hit like thrown water. Frost silvered the cabbage rows. Smoke from the kitchen chimneys drifted low and bitter. She ran anyway. Past the ash pit, past the laundry sheds, past the training ring where she had once been made to kneel for spilling broth on a steward's boot. Every corner of Dark Hollow held a memory of submission, and each one shoved her faster toward the outer wall. At the stable lane, she heard shouting erupt behind her, then the clanging bell that meant breach. "Stop her! Northgate! She is to be taken alive. Do you hear me? Alive? Alive for paperwork. Alive for lies. Alive until the moment became convenient." She cut through the tannery yard, vaulted a chain fence, and slammed hip first into a stack of wood that collapsed with a crack loud enough to wake the dead. Pain flared up her side. She kept moving. At the wall run, she ducked beneath a cart axle, found the drainage culvert half blocked with leaves, and crawled through mud and ice until she spilled into the ravine beyond the estate. Behind her, horns sounded once, then twice. By first light, she reached the old ash forest at the edge of mapped territory, the place children were warned away from, and hunters skirted with charms tied to their belts. The trunks were pale as bone, bark striped black where lightning had struck generations ago. The ground smelled of wet leaves, mushrooms, and old snow trapped in root shadow. Wind moved through high branches with a low, breathing hush that felt almost human. This was where unwanted things came to vanish. This was where she had decided to become small enough that no council could weaponize her. She limped between 2 massive ash trees and leaned both hands against one trunk, forehead pressed to lichen. Her lungs burned. Blood from her torn hand traced down her wrist, warm against the cold air. For a brief, aching moment, relief hollowed her out. She had made it past the wall. She could walk deeper, find a hollow, lie down, and let the forest keep the secret. No court, no confession, no choice forced on anyone. Then she heard it, another heartbeat, steady and near, matching her pace from just beyond the tree line. Not a hound, too measured, not a guard, too quiet. She turned. A man stood between 2 ash trunks, broad-shouldered in a weather-dark cloak, scar crossing from his left brow into his beard. his gaze fixed on her with the focus of a hunter and the grief of someone who had arrived too late once and never forgiven himself for it. Rumor gave him many names, mostly spoken in lowered voices around kitchen fires: War Captain, Oathbreaker, Ghost. Alistair Shadowfang, dead these 3 years, watched her as if death had decided to wait. Hoofbeats crashed from the ridge behind her. Riders in dark hollow colors fanned out at the forest edge, and 3 silver net hounds leapt from their leads, muzzles shining, eyes wild with trained hunger. Guinevere staggered back, caught between past and unknown, surrender and teeth. Alistair stepped forward, palms open, voice rough as stone and unexpectedly gentle when it reached her. If you fall tonight, the realm falls with you. The hounds hit the leaf mold in a spray of silver chain and mud, jaws clacking against their muzzles as they lunged for her scent line. Guinevere's injured ankle buckled, and the world narrowed to cold breath, pounding blood, and the man in front of her, who should have been a grave rumor. Alistair did not look back at the riders. He looked only at her, as if her answer mattered more than the weapons closing in. "Left of me," he said. "There are marker stones under the roots. Cross them and Dark Hollow has no lawful claim." Lawful. Even now he chose that word. Annette whistled past her shoulder and struck the ash trunk with a bright hiss where silver links bit bark. One of the riders shouted, "By order of Lady Darkhollow, stand down and surrender the asset." Asset. Not woman, not name. Alistair's expression hardened into something old and predatory. "You heard him," he said to Guinevere, voice low. "Move." She limped toward him, each step tearing heat through her ankle. He pivoted, placing his body between her and the nearest hound, and drew a short blade from his belt in a motion so efficient it felt rehearsed by grief. The first hound sprang. He sidestepped and drove the flat of the blade against its muzzle, forcing it off course without opening its throat. The second came under his arm. He caught the silver net attached to its harness, yanked hard, and sent both beast and chain skidding into a stand of thorn. The riders reached the tree line and reined hard, horses snorting steam. None crossed. Guinevere saw why when she nearly tripped over the first boundary stone, a low basalt post carved with the crescent fang sigil of the Shadowfang war host, old law cut deep and dark with age. More stones stood in a half-circle ahead, half swallowed by roots. The air over them carried a thin metallic scent, wardwork and oath blood layered through seasons. "Keep going," Alistair said. A rider lifted a hornbow. "Captain, do not make this treason." Captain, not ghost then, not dead. Alistair's laugh was brief and harsh. "You were ordered to loose silver hounds into sanctuary timber. You crossed into treason first." The arrow flew anyway. He turned with startling speed, took it through the outer meat of his upper arm, and stayed upright as if pain were a private inconvenience. Guinevere made a sound she did not recognize as her own. He snapped the shaft off, blood darkening his sleeve, and looked at her again with that same fierce concentration. "Stone to stone," he said. "Do not stop." She crossed the final marker and felt, more than heard, the ward take hold around her like a low hum in the bones of the ground. The hounds whined at the border and pawed furrows into the leaves, unwilling to breach. Riders cursed. One spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse. "This reaches the court by dusk," he called. "Lady Celeste will claim you both." "Then let her claim what she can prove," Alistair answered. For a suspended beat, no one moved. Then the riders withdrew in a clatter of hooves. Hounds dragged backward, snarling, silver links scraping stone. Their noise faded down the ridge until only wind and Guinevere's ragged breathing remained. She stayed standing through will alone. The warded ground tilted under her. Cold crept into her fingers. Alistair stepped closer, slower now, as if approaching a wounded animal he refused to frighten. "You are bleeding through your palm," he said. She glanced down and saw her right hand slick with fresh red where the vent grate had torn it open and the net line had reopened the cut. She had not felt it happen. Her body felt distant, borrowed. Alistair knelt without asking for gratitude, tore a strip from the inner hem of his cloak with his teeth, and held it out where she could see both his empty left hand and the cloth. "Permission," he said quietly. "Let me bind it." No one had asked her that word in years. Permission. It landed harder than command. Guinevere swallowed. "Why?" His gaze lifted to hers. Up close she could see the scar crossing his brow had not healed cleanly. It pulled when he frowned, giving him a permanent edge of severity he did not seem to notice. "Because you are in my territory, you are under pursuit, and you are still standing when most would be unconscious." A beat. "Because I would rather not watch you bleed into these roots." She extended her hand, fingers shaking. He wrapped the cloth once around her palm, once across her wrist, then tightened the knot with careful pressure. His own arm bled steadily, and when he shifted grip to secure the final fold, his blood slid warm over his knuckles and into the cut at the base of her thumb. The world changed. Heat surged from that point of contact up her forearm, across her chest, through her spine, too fast and precise to be fever. The scent of the forest sharpened until she could separate wet bark from old ash, his skin from iron, moonlight from stone, rain on iron, crushed cedar, ozone after lightning. Her pulse stuttered, then found a new rhythm that was not hers alone. Alistair jerked as if struck. A sharp breath tore out of him. The pupils of his eyes widened, then narrowed, and amber bled through his irises in a luminous ring that made him look less like a soldier and more like something ancient wearing one. He released her hand, stumbled back one step, and dropped to one knee. "No," he said under his breath. "Not to her. To fate. No. Not you." Guinevere could not answer. Invisible lines seemed to draw tight beneath her ribs, thread pulled through bone, tugging her toward him with terrifying inevitability and devastating relief. "Home," a buried certainty whispered, and she hated it because it felt true. He pressed his fist against his sternum as if holding himself together by force. "I should have reached you sooner," he said, voice hoarse. "Moon witness me, I should have." She stared, caught between panic and a hunger for proximity she did not understand. "What is happening to me?" His jaw flexed. "To us." The words should have sent her running. Instead, she swayed forward. "I am not safe. I am not sane. I am standing in a cursed forest with a dead captain who is not dead, and my blood is singing at his touch like I have waited years for a name I never knew I had. This is how traps work, I think. They offer warmth when you are freezing. They offer belonging when you have none. If I step toward him, I lose the small discipline that kept me alive in kitchens and cellars. If I step away, I tear myself from the first place my body has recognized as shelter. I do not trust him. I want to trust him. I want to lie down in the leaves and sleep for a week, and wake up to a world where no one can classify me into danger. I am so tired. I am so awake. The wind shifted, carrying the distant tang of horse sweat and silver from the retreating hunt. Alistair followed her gaze and forced himself upright, though his shoulders stayed taut. "We cannot remain at the boundary," he said. "My sentries patrol the inner ridge. Some still take orders from old grievances. All of them will smell this." His eyes flicked to her bound hand. "And if Celeste sent riders, she sent witnesses. We need shelter before sunset, and a story that keeps you breathing long enough to choose your own next step." Choose. He said it as if she might truly have that right. "Why did you say the realm falls if I do?" she asked. He went very still. The answer came slowly, each word dragged over restraint. "Because the Mooncrown bloodline was not eradicated. It was hidden. And because a prophecy was laid over the war host the night your family burned." She felt the ward stones hum under her boots. "What prophecy?" "That I would be the blade that protects the last Thornwood." He looked at her, and grief cut through the feral edge in his gaze. Or the blade that destroys her. Silence settled between them, dense as snow cloud. He took one measured step back, opening space rather than closing it, and bowed his head in an old, formal gesture she had seen nobles demand and never offer. When he spoke again, reverence and fear braided through his voice so tightly she could not separate them. Mine, if you choose it. Guinevere's breath caught. Every survival lesson she had learned said refusal, distance, disappear. Yet the pull in her chest did not feel like domination. It felt like recognition given shape, terrifying because it asked for consent rather than surrender. She moved toward him anyway, one careful step over the boundary stone, then another, and met his gaze without lowering her own. Alistair held that gaze for one long breath, then shifted sideways and pointed deeper into the ash stand, giving her a path that did not require her to brush past him. There is a watchtower ruin 2 ridges west, he said. Stone foundation, roof half gone, still dry in the lower room. We can be there before dark if your ankle holds. If, not when I carry you. Not keep up. Guinevere nodded once. The bond humming between them made every step feel charged with awareness, but he did not reach for her. He walked a careful distance ahead, blade low, wounded arm tight against his side, pausing often enough that she did not have to ask for rest. The forest changed as they climbed, ash giving way to cedar and black pine, resin thick in the air, the ground soft with old needles that muffled their movement. Twice she stumbled. Twice he looked back sharply, hands open, and waited for her decision before coming closer. By full dark, the broken watchtower rose out of the trees like a tooth of old war, upper stones split by roots, lower chamber sunk into earth and shadow. Inside, the room smelled of cold rock and rain trapped in mortar. A rusted brazier stood against one wall. Alistair checked corners, window slits, ceiling beams, then set his sword on the floor near the doorway, far enough from her that she could not mistake what he meant. He knelt by the brazier and sparked tinder with flint until a small flame took. When he finally looked at her, his voice had softened. Sit where you can see the entrance. She lowered herself onto a folded old banner half buried in dust, jaw tight against the pain in her ankle. He filled a dented kettle from a skin, then cupped both hands around the metal and held it over the low fire. Heat rolled from him in visible waves, wolf-born warmth drawn close and directed, and the water steamed faster than flame alone should have allowed. He set the kettle between them, then waited. Permission, he said again, quieter now. Your ankle is swelling. If we leave it like this, morning will be worse. The word struck her the same way it had at the boundary stones, as if her body recognized respect before her mind believed it. She extended her leg, boot trembling. He moved to her side on one knee, not looming, and touched the torn laces first, giving her space to pull away. When she did not, he eased the boot off millimeter by millimeter, his rough fingers unexpectedly precise. She hissed when cloth dragged over skin. I know, he murmured, and stopped until her breathing steadied. Tell me where to hold. No one had ever asked that either. She guided his hand to the outer calf. He braced there and poured warm water slowly over the ankle with the other, washing mud and blood away in thin red-brown streams that darkened the stone. The warmth loosened the hard shiver in her shoulders. He tore another strip from his cloak, wrapped the joint firmly, and checked the pressure against her pulse. Then he leaned back and pushed a wooden bowl toward her. Dried venison, root mash, bitter greens, plain and hot. She did not touch it. He understood at once. Without offense, without commentary, he picked up a second spoon, took 3 steady bites from her bowl, swallowed, then set it back in her hands. Same pot, he said. No powders, no sleep herbs. Guinevere stared at him, then at the bowl. A startled, almost absurd thought crossed her mind that she would remember later with embarrassment. This brutal, scarred captain had just demonstrated meal safety like a careful kitchen aunt. A brief laugh escaped her before she could stop it, thin and cracked from exhaustion. His mouth moved, almost a smile, gone in a blink. The tension in the room eased by a fraction. She ate. Slow at first, then with hunger that made her fingers shake. He did not watch her mouth. He watched the doorway, the slit windows, the dark beyond them. Every line of his body turned outward like a wall. When she finished, silence settled. Not hostile, only raw. The bond thrummed low between them, aware and waiting. She could feel him even without looking, that fierce, contained presence. Fear rose anyway, old and practiced. I am in a ruined tower with a warrior who could overpower me in a heartbeat, and the part of me trained by cellars and corridors is counting exits, distances, objects that can become weapons. I know this vigilance by heart. It kept me alive when kindness was a transaction and safety had a price. But he keeps stepping back when he could close in. He keeps asking when others took. He keeps choosing the harder shape of power, the one that does not bruise. I do not understand it. I want to. If I sleep, I might wake with chains. If I do not sleep, I will collapse and become a burden anyway. I hate that word. I hate that I already hear his voice against it. As if the thought had summoned him, Alistair spoke without turning from the entrance. You are not a burden. She flinched. Do you hear my thoughts now? No. A pause. But I know the look. I have worn it. He finally faced her, firelight cutting his scar into bronze and shadow. For a moment she saw past the captain and into the man beneath the armor of discipline. Exhausted, wired with pain, afraid of himself in ways he would never confess to an enemy. The prophecy does not excuse cruelty, he said. If I ever become a danger to you, you leave. If I say stay, you still leave. Do you understand me? She searched his face for mockery and found none. Why bind yourself with rules that help me against you? His answer came like stone dropped into deep water. Because once, in another war, I told myself necessity was enough. It was not. He did not elaborate. She sensed the edge there and, for the first time that day, chose not to press. He spread his cloak on the floor by the doorway and sat with his back against the wall. Injured arm cradled, sword still out of his reach, and closer to hers than his. Sleep if you can, he said. I will wake you before dawn. She drifted in and out, never fully gone, each time surfacing to find him in the same place, awake, listening. Once she woke to rain tapping broken stone and saw him feeding the fire with one hand, jaw tight with pain where the arrow wound had stiffened. He caught her looking, gave a short nod as if to say all is well, and returned to watch. Gray light seeped through the slits by morning, and with it came the scent of wolves on the lower ridge. Alistair was on his feet before she sat up. Company, he said. Stay behind me until I tell you otherwise. Bootsteps circled the tower. 3 men and a woman entered with pack insignia stitched into leather cuffs, spears upright, faces hard from patrol years and old loyalties. The tallest, a broad-chested sentry with frost in his beard, looked from Alistair to Guinevere and bared his teeth in something that was not a smile. So, the ghost captain lives, he said, and brings court refuse into Wardland. Guinevere felt the word like spit. Alistair's voice went flat. Name your report and leave. The sentry ignored him, eyes on her. Lady Celeste sent writ at first light. Says the girl is a palace plant using scent tricks to leash commanders. Orders restraint and return. He lifted iron manacles from his belt. Hands forward, spy. Guinevere did not move. Old terror and new fury crashed together in her chest. Another sentry stepped left to flank her. Do not make this ugly. Alistair shifted once, and the room changed. His shoulders widened, fingers lengthening as claws edged through skin, canines dropping with a soft click. Not full wolf, not man, but the battle form of an alpha who had no patience left for pretense. Power rolled off him, ancient command wrapped in threat. No chains, he said, each syllable precise. No one touches her wrists. Frostbeard planted his spear butt on stone. You hold no rank here, you abandoned the host. I bled for this host before you grew your first scar, Alistair said. By war law of Shadowfang command, I invoke protective claim over sanctuary guest. The woman sentry hesitated. The two younger men glanced at one another. Frostbeard sneered. Protective claim over a court liar? You are bewitched, Captain. He lunged, not with full force, but fast enough to close on Guinevere's arm. Alistair moved between them in a blur and took the spear meant to pin her sleeve. The tip drove through his shoulder near yesterday's wound, punching him backward into the wall with a grunt that ripped through her like wire. He stayed upright, hand clamped over the shaft, claws carving grooves into wood. Rage burned through Guinevere so clean it felt like winter air. She stepped beside him despite his outstretched arm. Do not call me Asset, she said, voice shaking but clear. Do not call me Refuse. My name is Guinevere Thornwood. The room went silent. Alistair broke the spear haft and let the front half clatter to stone. Blood darkened his shirt, but his posture did not bend. He looked straight at Frostbeard and spoke in a carrying command voice that belonged on a battlefield. You will address her by full name. Guinevere Thornwood, under my protection, by my oath and by old law. Witness it. The woman sentry dropped to one knee first, not submission to him, Guinevere realized with a jolt, but acknowledgement of protocol when lineage and sanctuary were invoked together. The younger men followed, uncertain but compliant. Frostbeard stood rigid 3 heartbeats more, then lowered his head a fraction. Witnessed, he said through clenched teeth. Alistair exhaled once, sharp. Now hear mine. Any writ from Celeste Darkhollow enters this territory for review, not obedience. You carry that to every border post by noon. If any patrol lays hands on Guinevere Thornwood without consent, they answer to me before council. Frostbeard's gaze flicked to the blood running down Alistair's arm. You are in no shape to threaten. Then call it a promise. The sentries withdrew with the broken spearhead and their unease. The woman paused at the threshold, met Guinevere's eyes, and gave the smallest nod before disappearing into the rain-bright morning. When they were gone, Alistair braced one hand on the wall. Color drained from his face. Guinevere crossed the distance and caught him under his good arm before he could protest. Sit, she ordered, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. He obeyed after a beat, lowering onto the banner by the fire. His blood smelled of iron and cedar and storm. Her hands shook as she cut cloth, cleaned the wound, packed it with crushed yarrow from his kit. He winced once, then stilled. You should have let him chain me, she muttered, angry tears blurring her vision. You were already hurt. He tipped his head, watching her with that unsettling steadiness. And teach them your wrists are public property? No. She tied the bandage hard enough to earn a breath from him. You are reckless. Only where it counts. A fragile silence followed, rain whispering against stone. She sat back on her heels, exhausted, furious, and fiercely aware that he had taken pain rather than let her be handled like cargo. Not for spectacle, not for leverage, for her. The knot behind her ribs eased by one careful thread. When she met his gaze this time, she did not look away at once. Thank you, Alistair, she said, and the use of his name felt like setting down one small piece of armor she had worn too long. Alistair's expression shifted in a way she had not yet learned to read. Surprise first, then a careful softness that made the scar at his brow seem less like a warning and more like history survived. Keep your strength for what comes next, he said. Gratitude can wait. A sharp whistle cut through the rain outside, 2 short notes and 1 long. Alistair was already moving before the echo died, snatching his sword from the floor with his good hand and angling himself between Guinevere and the doorway. The woman sentry who had knelt entered without raising her spear. Rain slicked her dark braid to her collar, and she held a sealed tube at arm's length as if it might bite. "Border post courier from the East Road," she said, breathing hard. "Temple wax, court script. It names both of you." Alistair did not lower the blade. "Name." "Tamsin Reed." Her eyes flicked to Guinevere, then back. "I served under you before the winter retreat." He gave one tight nod and took the tube. The seal bore the crescent of the moon temple, but the wax had been pressed too deeply at one edge, a small imperfection like a thumb forced where ceremony should have been clean. Alistair broke it. Guinevere watched his jaw harden as he read. "Say it aloud," she said. His gaze lifted, reluctant, then unflinching. "By decree of temple purity, Guinevere Thornwood is declared bearer of blighted royal blood and prohibited from claim, ceremony, inheritance, and mating under penalty of cleansing fire." The words struck the room like thrown gravel. Tamsin swore under her breath. "There is more," Alistair said. He handed the parchment to Guinevere. The script was elegant, legal, and poisonously calm. It declared that Alistair Shadowfang, confused by illicit scent compulsion, would submit to a purifying betrothal rite at the Temple of the Moon Goddess in 7 nights, where Lady Celeste Darkhollow would join blood and restore legitimate order. 2 witnessing signatures followed beneath temple braid marks, Elder Marrow and Elder Sable. Guinevere's stomach turned. "They made me a disease and made you a victim," in 1 page. "That is the design," Alistair said. "If they call our bond a crime, anyone defending you becomes a traitor. If they call me bewitched, they erase my judgment and keep my command." Tamsin leaned closer, face pale with anger. This was posted at 3 trading gates before dawn. Runners carried copies to every allied hall. Celeste was not improvising. She had built a framework where mercy looked weak, and violence looked responsible. Guinevere saw it with sick clarity. This was not merely about killing one rival woman. It was succession law, rewritten in public, with temple language as the blade. "I know this pattern. Dress cruelty in ritual, and people call it duty. Rename theft as stability, and the frightened will thank you for their own cages. I have scrubbed those floors. I have carried trays into rooms where men argued about famine with full plates in front of them. I have watched names disappear from household ledgers and learned not to ask where the girls went. Celeste is doing the same thing at kingdom scale. If I stay hidden, she wins by default. If I step forward alone, she burns me with doctrine. If I run, I become proof of guilt. I am tired of being arranged by other hands. I am terrified. I am still here." She lowered the parchment. "Who else received this?" Tamsin answered immediately. "All border captains. Most pack alphas. The neutral council at Grey Hollow should have it by evening, if the road stayed open." Alistair gave orders with battlefield precision. "Return to your post. Carry my counter notice. Sanctuary claim remains active, writ disputed, and any attempt to seize Guinevere Thornwood violates old law. Use my war mark." Tamsin hesitated. "Half the captains will ignore it. Half is not all." She hit her fist once to her chest and went, leaving wet footprints and the smell of pine rain behind her. For a moment there was only the fire, the parchment in Guinevere's hand, and Alistair breathing through pain he would not name. Then he crossed to her and stopped at arm's length. "We need allies not bought by Darkhollow coin," he said. "Hidden Valley keeps neutral seats and sanctuary records older than Celeste's house. If we reach them before her envoys, we have a chance to challenge the decree before it hardens into custom. And if we do not, then this becomes the prevailing consensus by repetition." His mouth tightened. "A lie said from enough podiums starts wearing a crown." By late afternoon, rain thinned to mist as they descended into the fold of land locals called Hidden Valley, a basin ringed by black rock and cedar, smoke rising from low slate roofs tucked beneath the trees. Children's laughter carried from somewhere near the lower springs, quick and bright, startling in a day carved by legal threats and blood. Guinevere felt the bond's low thrum each time Alistair drew near to steady her over slick stones, and each time he asked first, "May I?" At a fallen trunk she nodded. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady. No pressure beyond what balance required. The contact lasted 3 breaths. It lingered like a brand anyway. Hidden Valley's gate was not a gate at all, but 2 weathered pillars etched with wolf sigils from clans long dissolved. An older woman in healer gray met them in the yard, silver hair braided tight, eyes assessing and kind in equal measure. "Captain," she said, "you look like trouble tied itself to your shoulders." "Etta," he replied with the faintest hint of relief. "I need clean bandages, ink, and your fastest runner." Etta's gaze found Guinevere and held, not pitying, not suspicious. "And you are the woman everyone is already lying about." Guinevere almost laughed at the bluntness. "That appears to be me." Inside Etta's hall, the air smelled of rosemary, damp wool, and broth. Alistair sat while Guinevere rewrapped his shoulder under Etta's instructions, fingers gaining confidence as she worked. He watched her as if every knot she tied proved a private theorem he had hoped true. When she finished, he touched her wrist lightly. "Thank you." The simple reciprocity undid her more than grand vows could have. He dictated 3 letters while she sanded the ink. 1 to Grey Hollow's neutral council demanding immediate review of the temple decree. 1 to border captains invoking sanctuary statute. 1 to the archive keeper of Moon Temple requesting seal verification. He signed with the old Shadowfang war mark and pressed black wax with a ring he wore on a cord, rather than his hand. An hour later, the first answer returned, carried by a breathless courier with mud to his knees. Grey Hollow acknowledged receipt and requested appearances from both parties in 5 days. It was procedural, cautious, and better than silence. The second reply came near dusk from the archive keeper, a narrow strip of parchment in cramped script, seal pattern inconsistent with temple standard, ink composition unknown, verification withheld pending inspection, forgery then. Not proven in court yet, but enough to crack certainty. A primary consideration should have been relief. Instead, pressure intensified. Celeste would know her document was challenged. She would move faster. As cedar shadows lengthened across the valley, Alistair stood with Guinevere on the back steps of Etta's hall, watching smoke curl from cook fires and wolves in human form cross the yard with lowered voices. The bond between them felt less like shock now, and more like a river finding channels through stone, persistent, undeniable, reshaping edges by patient force. "If this breaks into open faction conflict," Guinevere said, "how many die because of my name?" Alistair's profile was stern against the dim sky. "People may die because Celeste chooses power over law. Do not take ownership of another person's cruelty." "That sounds noble. It does not feel true." He turned to her fully, close enough that she could count raindrops caught in his lashes. "Then hold this instead. You did not start this war. You are ending an old one by refusing to vanish." The words settled in her chest with terrifying hope. "I am standing beside a man built for battle, and my fear has not disappeared. It has changed shape. I fear losing him. I fear needing him. I fear what happens if I become accustomed to being asked instead of ordered, seen instead of catalogued, named instead of dismissed. Desire is easier than trust because desire can be denied. Trust rewrites the map. If I let this bond matter, then every threat to him enters me like weather through broken glass. But when he says my name, the numbness I wore for years keeps breaking apart, and I am not sure I want to rebuild it. I think this is what healing feels like before it feels safe." A horn sounded from the upper ridge, urgent and wrong, not patrol cadence, alarm. Men and women flooded the yard, weapons snatched from hooks, voices overlapping. Tamsin came down the slope at a run, cloak torn at one shoulder, face ash white. "They took the Springhouse children," she said, barely getting the words out. "Not hurt. Gone. 5 of them. Left this." She held out a small leather case marked with dark hollow silver thread. Inside lay 5 narrow collars of woven moonsteel and a folded card sealed in red wax. Guinevere's pulse crashed in her ears. Alistair broke the seal. He read once, then handed it to Guinevere without speaking. "Lady Celeste Darkhollow requests the presence of Captain Alistair Shadowfang at the purifying betrothal rite, Temple of the Moon Goddess, at next moonrise. Arrive unaccompanied and compliant. Defiance will be interpreted as consent to corrective measures upon hostages presently under noble care." Beneath the line, a postscript in a different hand listed the children by first name and age, clinical as inventory. The yard had gone silent except for the wind. Etta swore, low and shaking. Tamsin looked ready to tear something apart with her teeth. Alistair stood very still, the kind of stillness that came before violence. "Where?" he asked. Tamsin's throat worked. "West Switchback. 2 wagons with temple pennants. No insignia on guards. They used smoke bombs at the spring path. By the time we cleared it, the road was empty." Guinevere closed her fingers over the card until its edge bit her palm through the bandage. Celeste had solved the legal problem with a human one. Not evidence now. Leverage. Alistair's voice came out rough with fury contained by discipline. "I go to the temple, alone if required. We get them back first." Guinevere looked up at him, and every old pattern rose to meet this moment. Let the powerful decide, accept the terms, survive what remains. The bond between them surged hot with shared fear and a sharper thing underneath. A refusal not yet spoken. In the valley below, the alarm horn sounded again, longer this time, carrying into the dark like a wound opening. The next moonrise was less than a day away, and the road to the temple had already begun to close. Guinevere lifted her head as the second horn note faded and heard her own voice cut across the yard, clear enough to stop 3 people mid-step. "No." Alistair turned, fury still banked behind his ribs. "Guinevere." "No." She walked to him, card still clenched in her hand, and held his gaze instead of the wound on his shoulder or the strain in his jaw. "You do not walk into her ritual alone while I wait for news like a servant outside a locked door. She wrote my name into the threat. She wants me absent because absence is how she wins." Around them, wolves in leather and rough wool pretended to busy themselves with saddles and blades, while listening to every word. Etta came forward and took the leather case of collars from Tamsin, turning one in her hands under the torchlight. "Moonsteel weave," she muttered. "Temple pattern copied, not temple forged. Crude trigger knots. Fright tools more than execution tools." Tamsin swore again, quieter this time. "So she bluffed?" Etta looked up, expression hard. "She built a stage. Stages can kill reputations faster than steel." That was the crux of it, Guinevere realized with a cold, lucid steadiness that surprised her. Celeste was not gambling on a clean murder in the dark. She was constructing consent in public, forcing everyone to watch cruelty renamed as governance. If Alistair surrendered and she stayed hidden, the story would calcify by dawn. Alistair's hand came up, fingers brushing the back of her wrist, asking without words for one private beat in the middle of chaos. She nodded. They stepped into the narrow shadow beside Etta's hall, close enough for honesty and too close for comfort. "If she sees you at that temple," he said, voice low and frayed, "she will strike through law first and arrows second." "She already is." Guinevere opened her hand and showed him the edge of the card had cut a fresh crescent through her bandage. "You told me yesterday not to take ownership of another person's cruelty. I heard you. Now hear me. I refuse to hand her my silence and call it strategy." He shut his eyes for one breath, then opened them with a different kind of resolve, the hard pivot from protector to partner. "Then we do this your way and mine together. No private heroics. No martyr bargains." Agreed. By the time the moon cleared the eastern ridge, they had moved with ruthless precision. Tamsin rode ahead to Grey Hollow's nearest relay with copies of the forged decree and the archive keeper's verification strip. Etta sent 2 neutral matrons to witness any temple proceeding and carry immediate testimony back to the council. Alistair and Guinevere rode the center track with 6 valley guards, banners furled so no one could claim military provocation. The road wound through cedar and exposed stone, each turn silvered by rising moonlight, and the bond between them beat like a second pulse in the hollow of her throat. The temple of the moon goddess stood on a high shelf of black granite, columns pale against the night, braziers lining the broad steps in disciplined rows. Too many people had already gathered. Pack envoys, temple functionaries, opportunists in fine cloaks, and the 2 elders who had signed Celeste's decree waited in a half-circle around the central dais. Guinevere saw the children at once and forced herself to breathe. They sat together on a raised platform near the west wall, with blankets around their shoulders and temple attendants beside them, frightened but physically unharmed, collars visible and deliberately gleaming in the firelight like legal punctuation. Celeste Darkhollow stood at the heart of the sigil in ceremonial white, threaded with silver. Every inch the savior she had scripted. When she saw Guinevere step into the torchlight at Alistair's side, her smile did not falter, but something brittle entered it. "Captain?" Celeste called, voice carrying across stone. "You were instructed to arrive alone." "And you were instructed," Alistair answered, "to stop forging temple authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elder Marrow lifted his staff. "This is sacred ground. Disorder will be punished." Guinevere moved 1 pace forward before anyone else could define the frame. "Then begin with the disorder already committed. The decree seal is false. Your own archive keeper withheld verification." Elder Sable's chin lifted in practiced disdain. "A servant girl recites stationery and thinks she speaks law." Guinevere felt the old reflex to shrink, to lower her eyes, to survive by becoming negligible. It rose and broke against the memory of Alistair taking a spear to keep iron off her wrists. She stood taller. "My name is Guinevere Thornwood." Celeste's gaze sharpened. "A borrowed surname does not grant legitimacy." "No," Guinevere said. "Blood does." She walked past Alistair before he could stop her, crossed the outer ring of carved stone, and entered the central sigil alone. A collective intake of breath followed her. The moon sat high enough now that its light struck the dais directly, pale and unforgiving. Alistair's voice hit her back like a hand. "Guinevere." She did not turn. "Trust me." Celeste spread her arms in theatrical sorrow. "Witness this tragedy. The blighted line presents itself and confirms corruption by compulsion." "Then witness clearly," Guinevere said. With steady fingers, she pulled her cloak down from one shoulder and turned so the upper line of her back caught the moon. The Thornwood blood mark, long hidden under linen and labor, flared from dormant ember to liquid silver. Ash leaves circling a wolf crown, the old royal sign burned into skin and memory. Gasps broke open around the courtyard. Even the temple attendants near the children stepped back in startled reverence. The sigil beneath her feet answered, thin lines of light spidering through carved channels that had been dead for decades. Guinevere felt inheritance magic wake like deep water rising, not violent but immense. She raised the forged decree parchment high, then let it fall into the center groove. "This law was counterfeited," she said, voice ringing against stone. "This right was coerced. This court was convened under fraud." Silver fire licked the parchment edges and ran outward through hidden seal points embedded around the dais. One by one, Celeste's planted charms cracked with sharp reports, wax and rune metal snapping apart in sparks that died before they touched skin. The false framework she had buried beneath ceremony surfaced and failed in front of everyone. Celeste's composure splintered. Archers! The word cracked like a whip. Bows rose from the upper colonnade. Guinevere moved on instinct and decision at once. She thrust both hands toward the west platform where the children sat and pulled on the live current under the sigil. A silver ward vaulted up in a curved wall around them first, translucent and bright as moonlit ice. The first volley hit it and skittered away in harmless bursts of light. Only then did she pivot, extending the shield's second arc toward Alistair and the Valley Guards as a narrower barrier snapped into place. The order of protection was unmistakable. So was the politics of it. Alistair stood inside the second arc, eyes fixed on her with a raw, stunned pride that made her chest ache. He did not charge. He held formation, barking commands to disarm the colonnade without lethal strikes, honoring the choice she had made in public. Celeste descended from the dais edge, white skirts hissing over stone, and drew a consecrated silver blade from within her sleeve. "You are unfit," she spat, "untrained, unstable, bred from treason and kitchen filth." Guinevere let the ward hold and stepped to meet her. Celeste lunged for her throat, fast and elegant, years of court fencing honed for the single decisive cut. Guinevere sidestepped, caught Celeste's wrist with both hands and used the momentum to drive the blade down, point first, into the temple oath stone set at the dais center. Silver met oath granite with a ringing crack that shivered through every column. Truth fire ignited. Not flame that burned flesh, flame that burned deceit. Pale gold ran up the blade over Celeste's arm and around her throat in a narrow band of light. She jerked back, but the oath stone held her words in a tightening loop. Elder Marrow shouted, "Break the stone! Break it now!" "No!" came three voices at once. Alistair, Edda's matron witness, and a gray hollow adjudicator who had just reached the upper steps, breathless and furious. "Proceed." Celeste fought the compulsion, jaw trembling. The truth fire brightened until speech tore free of her anyway. "I forged the decree," she choked out. "Temple wax recast from funerary stock. Marrow and Sable took my coin." Marrow went gray. Sable tried to back away and was seized by two neutral guards. Celeste's eyes went wild, fixed on Guinevere with naked hatred as confession kept spilling. "I hired the Silvernet hounds. I ordered the pursuit in Ash Sanctuary. I dosed two witnesses to claim scent bewitchment. I staged the collars. I meant to bind Shadowfang, take legitimacy through mating right, and hang her for blight at dawn." The courtyard erupted in shouts. Pack envoys who had arrived prepared to endorse purification now stared at one another as the entire narrative collapsed under Oathstone law. The children on the west platform remained behind the intact ward, watched by attendants who had gone from rigid neutrality to protective urgency. Alistair reached the dais in 3 strides once the adjudicator signaled clear. His voice carried like iron. "Celeste Darkhollow, by your own sworn confession, you stand stripped of noble authority pending council sentence." Celeste tried to wrench free again. The light around her throat tightened and held. "Do it yourself," she hissed at him. "You always were a weapon looking for a leash." His face was carved stone. No private vengeance. Guinevere stepped beside him, breath shaking, power still humming through her bones. She looked from Celeste to the gathered witnesses, then to the neutral adjudicator now opening a formal ledger on the temple step. "This court will not trade one abuse for another," she said. "Record this under unified review. Celeste Darkhollow is stripped of rank, lands placed under provisional stewardship, and sentenced to exile in iron wards beyond Pack borders after council ratification. She will live with what she built." Celeste's lip curled. Last venom gathered for one final strike. "You were born to kneel." Guinevere met her gaze without flinching. I was born to choose. The oathstone flared once, bright as dawn, sealing judgment witness by witness as each envoy touched staff or hand to granite and spoke assent. Marrow and Sable were taken into custody for tribunal. The archers laid down bows under guard. Temple attendants removed the moonsteel collars and dropped them into a lead-lined chest for evidence, catalogued in full view of the court so no one could later claim fabrication. Tamsin arrived at last with Grey Hollow riders at her back and saw the children already being escorted, calm and bundled, toward Edda's matrons. When Celeste was led down the steps in iron cuffs that dimmed her scent and status alike, she did not look at anyone but Guinevere. Guinevere held that stare until distance took it. Only then did her knees threaten to fold. Alistair's hand found her elbow, steady and warm, not possession, only support offered and accepted. Around them, the temple that had been prepared for coercion had become, by force of witness and truth fire, the place where her name could no longer be erased. The temple emptied by degrees, not silence but aftermath. Boots on stone, ledger pages turning, children crying once they were finally safe enough to cry. Guinevere stood at the edge of the dais while Grey Hollow clerks sealed evidence in her sight. The lead-lined chest took the 5 moonsteel collars, each tagged with the child's name from Celeste's card, and the artificer's first note that the trigger knots were theater unless keyed by a master clasp that had not been present. The forged decree went into a second case with the shattered seal points collected from the sigil groove. Elder Marrow and Elder Sable were marched out under guard, their protest cut short when the archive keeper from Moon Temple arrived breathless and furious, carrying the funerary wax block whose composition matched Celeste's counterfeit stamp. 3 hours before dawn, that same keeper signed the tribunal register and said, "For every witness to hear." The seal flaw on first notice was a thumb press made after cooling. Temple presses do not do that. I delayed verification because it was false. Only then did Guinevere let herself breathe all the way down. Alistair waited with her in a side court open to the moon, blood cleaned from his shoulder, fresh bandage tight beneath a dark shirt. He watched her as if he was still counting exits for danger. She watched him as if she was learning what happened to a battlefield carved into a man when he finally stopped bracing for betrayal. "Judgment stands," he said quietly. "Celeste is in iron wards until escort at sunrise. Exile route already posted to every border captain. No one can vanish her and call it mercy." Guinevere nodded. "And the children?" "Edda has them." Tamsin refused to sleep and posted double watch outside their room. At Tamsin's name, Guinevere remembered the first sharp nod in the watchtower doorway, the one that had looked like hesitation until it became allegiance. Why did she trust me that day? Alistair's mouth tightened, then softened. Her sister was taken in chains by a council levy years ago. Wrong girl, wrong debt, no appeal. Tamsin never forgot the sound of iron on stone. A wall she had not known she had built began to crumble. "Tell her I know what that sound is." "I think she already knows you do." Moonlight silvered the flagstones between them. The bond had steadied since the dais, no longer a violent pull, more like deep current finding the same shore from 2 directions, still unfinished, still asking. Alistair drew one breath and lowered to one knee, not in submission to rank, but in ritual gravity. His voice roughened, formal words shaped with visible care. "Guinevere Thornwood, before Moon Witness and lawful record, I ask consent to claim you as mate. I vow guard without cage, strength without domination, truth without concealment. If ever I break these, you owe me no obedience. Do you grant me leave to mark?" Every person who had ever ordered her to kneel seemed to fade behind that question. She stepped closer until his breath warmed her wrist. "Alistair Shadowfang, before Moon Witness and lawful record, I grant leave. I claim in return. I vow counsel without silence, loyalty without erasure, and I will not disappear to make your burden lighter. If I fear, I will speak. If you fear, you will speak." Do you grant me leave to mark? His eyes closed for one heartbeat. I do. He rose slowly, giving her time to step away. She did not. She tilted her head, exposing the curve where neck met shoulder, pulse quick beneath skin. His hand came up, paused a hair from her collarbone until she nodded, then settled there with reverent steadiness. When his teeth pierced skin, pain flashed bright and precise, a clean sting that turned almost immediately into spreading heat. Not loss, recognition. The bond opened. Memory and feeling poured through in fierce, ordered waves. His side first. Winter retreat smoke. A command he regretted. Names of soldiers carried like stones in his chest. The moment at the tree line when he saw her bleeding against ash bark and knew the prophecy had stopped being abstract. Then hers. Cellar damp. Ledger ink. The archive door crack. Years of being called useful as if usefulness were the only form of worth. He did not turn away from any of it. She felt him take it in and stay. Heat surged from the mark through her spine and into her hands. The pain folded into something steadier. A low thrum of safety she had never trusted enough to imagine. His forehead touched hers, both of them breathing hard. Mine, he whispered, the word trembling not with possession, but awe. Yours, she answered, and meant partnership, not surrender. He drew back, eyes bright, and bared the heart mark at his chest where old rune lines crossed above his sternum. He took her wrists gently and placed her palms there so she could feel the hammering beneath skin and scar. Now you, he said, choose it. She did. She slid one hand to his jaw, the other behind his neck, and bit over the heart mark with deliberate pressure. He shuddered against her, a rough sound breaking free as the second claim took hold. For one suspended instant the court, the war, the temple all disappeared into white gold threads, unspooling from both marks and wrapping around them invisible arcs of light. The mate circuit sealed, not a chain, but a bridge, and the frantic edges inside her finally settled. She tasted iron and cedar, then warmth flooding back through the bond like sunlight through cold water. His fear of becoming her destroyer met her certainty and changed shape. Her fear of being erased met his vow and lost its teeth. Mate, he breathed against her hair. Mate, she echoed, and the word landed like home. They stayed there, arms around each other, while the bond quieted into a living presence under skin. No crowd, no spectacle. Just held breath becoming steady breath. When she swayed from exhaustion, he did not lift her without asking, "Can I carry you to the fire?" "Yes." By dawn they sat wrapped in one cloak in the temple's lower chamber, foreheads touching, listening to rain begin on the roof tiles. The marks at shoulder and chest pulsed once, synchronized, then went warm and calm. 19 days later, the rebuilt forest hall opened its doors on the same ridge where she had once planned to vanish. Cedar beams still smelled fresh cut. Ash leaf banners hung beside Shadowfang Black, equal height. Every clan sent witness delegates because no one could now pretend ignorance. Grey Hollow's adjudicator read the finalized rulings from the central dais. Celeste Darkhollow exiled beyond pack borders under Iron Ward escort at sunrise 3 days prior. Marrow and Sable stripped and sentenced to labor in temple restitution houses. All counterfeit decree copies burned under neutral supervision. Surviving evidence archived in duplicate at Grey Hollow and Moon Temple. Guinevere stood beside Alistair in dark blue wool trimmed with silver thread, her mark visible above her collar by her own choice. When the oath staff was offered, she took it first, then passed it to him. Co-rule, witnessed. Her voice carried to the back wall. My first decree as Luna Queen abolishes servant debt bondage across United Territories. Existing ledgers are void. No child inherits labor sentence. Any householding debt callers surrenders them by second moonrise for dismantling under council audit. The hall went so still she could hear fire pop in the braziers. Then Etta, seated in the restored neutral healer seat, struck her staff once in approval. Tamsin followed from the captain's row, then Frostbeard, who had requested speaking rights, and now knelt without being told. "I called you refuse," he said, head bowed. "I was wrong. I submit formal apology to Guinevere Thornwood and accept reassignment under her law." "Accepted," she said. "Rise and serve it." He did. After oaths, children spilled into the front court while adults still argued trade routes and border patrol rotations with the new transparency charter spread across a long table. Two of the rescued Springhouse boys raced past Guinevere and Alistair with carved wooden wolves in their fists, shrieking laughter instead of fear. Tamsin chased at a dignified distance and failed not to smile. Near sunset, Guinevere and Alistair took first joint patrol to the tree line. The same ash trunk stood pale in evening light, and this time no horns chased her breathing. Wolves and humans from 3 clans walked the perimeter openly, mixed pairs, no one hiding sigils. At the old boundary stone, Alistair laced his fingers through hers. "You are not a burden," he said, voice low, transformed by everything they had survived. She looked at him, at the scar, at the mark she had given over his heart. "Neither are you my doom." When they turned back toward the hall, the gathered packs bowed once, not to one ruler above them, but to both. Behind the bowing line, children ran between cedar posts, safe and loud and utterly unafraid.